Why was she, the only one standing at the edge, while they whispered behind her back? Wind cut sharp across the rooftop that morning. 2 stories high, concrete stretching flat beneath a sky that hadn't decided yet whether to commit to dawn or stay locked in that gray space between night and reckoning. Sodium lights hummed under the catwalk, casting shadows that moved when nothing else did. The air tasted like steel cable and wet nylon, the kind of smell that clings to your uniform and reminds you where you are even when your mind tries to drift somewhere safer. Lieutenant Commander Asha Breyer stood near the edge. Not leaning, not posing, just standing. Clipboard in one gloved hand, timing baton clipped to her belt. Her uniform pressed clean, not because inspection was coming, but because pattern mattered. Because small disciplines held when big ones failed. Her dark hair tied back regulation tight. Boots scuffed at the soles from use but spotless everywhere else. Every angle of her stance said ready without needing to announce it. She didn't speak loud, never had to. Edge approach drill, she said, voice steady as the ground beneath her boots. Contact point at marker 3. Time starts when the forward boot crosses. You reset at the rooftop corner after rappel. No inflection, no charisma, just instructions delivered the way they needed to be heard. Clear, direct, unadorned. Around her, recruits and instructors shifted in loose rotations. Marines and SEAL candidates paired off for joint exercise, some attentive, others less so. Training facilities ran on adrenaline and coffee, but this one ran on something sharper. Control. The kind that started at the edge and worked backward into every decision, every breath, every moment someone decided whether to follow protocol or follow pride. 3 corporals lingered off to the side. Marine issue. Roth, Kellen, and Bryant. Mid-20s, boots caked with yesterday's mud, harnesses not even fastened yet. They hadn't liked the way she'd corrected them earlier when she'd stopped their staggered approach mid-stride and wordlessly reordered them. No insult, no raised voice, just a quiet realignment that made them look like they didn't know what they were doing. And maybe they didn't, but that wasn't what bothered them most. She doesn't even look at us when she talks, Kellen muttered near the rigging table. His voice low, threaded with something between confusion and irritation. Bryant snorted, walks like she's 2 ranks higher than she is. Roth replied without looking up. She is. She's SEAL. That doesn't make her untouchable. But it should have. Because what they didn't understand yet, what they couldn't see past their bruised egos and their need to be recognized, was that rank wasn't about volume. It wasn't about presence. It was about precision. And Asha had spent years learning how to move through spaces without demanding attention, how to correct without confrontation, how to lead without needing anyone to follow her with their eyes. She knelt at the far edge now, checking the anchor hook on a static line. Didn't look up, didn't pause, just shifted her weight slightly, enough to let anyone watching know she was aware. Always aware. You didn't survive Tier 1 operations by being oblivious. You survived by reading the room before the room knew it needed reading. Roth whispered something else. Low, thin, barely carried by the wind. Maybe we show her what slipping actually looks like. Kellen's posture straightened. That's a joke, right? Bryant hesitated. The 3 looked toward the edge, then toward her, and one of them took a half step forward. Asha had checked every harness herself that morning. Every rope line, every anchor hook, every corner where the safety markers were peeling from exposure. The Joint Urban Combat Training Facility didn't run on adrenaline. It ran on control, and control started at the edge. She stepped to that edge now. Clipboard tucked under her arm, boots aligned behind the yellow line that marked the boundary between instruction and descent. 2 stories down, stacked foam crash pads formed the makeshift landing zone, normally used for controlled falls, safe drop maneuver sequences. Not today. She looked down, made a note about wind shear, adjusted the timing baton on her belt. Her presence was silent but never absent. That was what irritated them most. The way she existed without needing them to validate it. Behind her, the 3 corporals hovered again. Roth nudged Kellen with his elbow, but she can't keep that clipboard straight if her feet leave the ground. Kellen forced a grin, didn't reach his eyes. You're not serious, she just needs a scare. a little wobble to take her down a notch. Bryant said nothing, but he didn't step away either. Ashas spoke without turning. Stay clear of the edge marker. It's there for a reason. Even tone, not a warning. A reminder, but reminders only work when people want to listen. Roth's smirk twisted. He stepped closer. Too close. Ashaz's weight shifted. Her heel moved half an inch. Gravel breath. A presence where it shouldn't be. Her left shoulder turned. Eyes narrowing, not fast enough. The shove came without noise. Two hands, flat palms high between her shoulder blades. Firm, measured, not rage, calculation. She stumbled forward. Instinct took over. Knees bent. Body twisted midair. She pitched sideways as the rooftop disappeared beneath her. No scream, just the rush of wind and the dull thud of boots leaving contact, then impact. The crash pads broke her fall, not the pain. Her ribs caught the edge first, then her shoulder. The clipboard skittered off her chest and landed with a wet slap on the rubber mat. Air burst from her lungs in a single violent exhale. She lay still. Above, silence. A few recruits who'd been standing nearby turned in shock. One SEAL candidate dropped the rope he'd been coiling. Another called for the medic. From the rooftop, the three corporals froze. She landed on the pads, Bryant whispered. Too hard, Kellen muttered. Way too hard. Roth stepped back, color draining from his face. She's not moving. But then she did. Ashaz's right hand clenched, then her arm bent. She pushed herself up slowly, one knee planted, the other foot grounded. Deep breath, controlled. A medic ran across the yard. "Ma'am, are you?" "I'm fine," her voice didn't waver. "Continue training." She stood fully now, shoulder tight, spine favoring the left. Pain flashed through her eyes for a second, just a second. Then it was gone. She retrieved the clipboard, shook the dust from it, looked upward, not searching, finding. Her gaze landed on the three shadows watching from above and held. No anger, no expression, just awareness and recognition. Because she knew, she'd always known. You don't survive what she'd survived by being naive. You survive by watching, by waiting, by understanding that some lessons can't be taught with words. What do you do when the system that's supposed to protect you asks you to file paperwork instead? Ashad didn't walk to the medbay so much as she measured her way there. Each step deliberate, spine straight despite the throb pulsing low along her ribs. The clinic sat on the east side of the facility, attached to the admin wing by a narrow hallway that always smelled faintly of antiseptic and old canvas. Morning light through frosted windows cut pale bars across the floor. The moment she stepped inside, the on-duty medic looked up sharply from his charting desk. Lieutenant Commander Breyer, Chief Petty Officer Lang's voice pitched with concern. "They said you fell from 2 stories. Sit now." "I'm standing." She set her clipboard on the edge of the bed instead. "Let's keep this brief." Lang exhaled through his nose, the kind of breath medics used when they knew arguing was pointless. He guided her onto the exam table anyway, fingertips careful against her shoulder as he checked alignment. She winced once, barely. "Mild spinal compression," he muttered, pressing gently down the side of her back. "Bruising definitely. Nothing broken. You should rest for." "No rest." Ashaz's voice remained steady. "I'm reporting for afternoon rotation." Lang froze. "Ma'am, that was a 2-story drop. You're lucky you didn't crack vertebrae." "I've taken worse." He pulled back, studying her expression. No humor, no bravado, just truth delivered without drama. Ashas slid off the table before he finished writing her chart and reached for her uniform jacket, brushing dry dust from the sleeve with quiet, repetitive strokes. Not agitated, methodical, reclaiming order. The medbay door opened with a soft hydraulic sigh. Lieutenant Harper stepped in. Internal Affairs Liaison, uniform immaculate, hair pinned tight. "Commander Breyer," she greeted. "I was told you fell during training. I need to complete the incident report." Ashaz slid her arm back into her jacket. "It wasn't an accident." Harper's pen paused mid-click. "I'm sorry. 3 Marines were behind me. Corporals Roth, Kellen, and Bryant. Lang's eyes widened. "Ma'am, that's—" Ashash shook her head, not filing a complaint. Harper blinked. "Then why are you telling me?" "Because you asked, and because I wanted it documented, but I'm not pressing charges." Harper set her pen down slowly. "Commander, you were pushed off a building. That's assault. That's court-martial territory. That's also over." Asha adjusted her collar. "I don't need the system to correct what I can handle myself." Harper's jaw tightened. "With respect, that's not how this works. We have protocols, chain of command, legal recourse. And I have time." Asha met her gaze. 24 hours. Then we'll see who learned their lesson." There was something in her voice that didn't invite debate. Not anger, not threat, just certainty. The kind that comes from knowing exactly how much force you're capable of applying and choosing, very deliberately, not to use it yet. Harper looked at Lang. Lang looked at the floor. Asha walked out before either of them could form another question. Outside, the wind had picked up. She stood for a moment near the entrance, one hand pressed lightly against her ribs where the bruising had already started to bloom beneath the fabric. Pain was information. It told you what broke and what held. Right now, nothing was broken, but something had shifted, not in her body, in her resolve. She'd spent years in black bag operations no one talked about. Blast zones, collapsed buildings, missions where the margin between survival and casualty was measured in fractions of seconds and the steadiness of your breathing. She'd seen what happened when people acted on impulse, when they let emotion override discipline. She'd buried teammates who'd made that mistake. But she'd also learned something else. That correction didn't always come from the top down. Sometimes it came from the ground up. Sometimes the best way to teach someone was to show them exactly what they were capable of surviving and what they weren't capable of escaping. She walked across the yard slowly past recruits who paused mid-drill to watch her. Word had already spread. Lieutenant Commander pushed off the roof, landed hard, walked away. The story was already becoming legend, the details sharpening with each retelling. But what they didn't know yet, what they couldn't see, was that the story wasn't over. It hadn't even started. That night Asha sat alone in her quarters. Small room, single bunk, locker at the foot, desk against the wall with nothing on it but a lamp and a notebook. No photos, no personal effects. She'd learned a long time ago not to carry more than you could leave behind in 30 seconds, not because she was running, because she knew how quickly everything could change. She opened the notebook. Blank page. She didn't write anything, just stared at it, thinking, calculating, not revenge, correction. There was a difference. Revenge was emotional, reactive, messy. Correction was surgical. It required patience, precision, and the willingness to let someone else make the first move so you could make the last one. She'd already decided. Tomorrow morning she'd go back to the warehouse. She'd find them. And she'd deliver the kind of lesson that didn't come with paperwork or protocol. The kind that came face to face, mat to mat, with nothing between them but the truth they'd been avoiding. That some people needed to be shown, not told, shown. Have you ever waited for the perfect moment, knowing it would come, no matter how long it took? The warehouse sat on the western edge of the facility, corrugated steel walls and high ceilings that trapped sound and made every footstep echo. It was used for close-quarters drills, hand-to-hand recertifications, and the kind of training that left bruises no one asked about afterward. Morning light filtered through skylights, casting long geometric shadows across the mats. Asha arrived early, before the scheduled rotation, before anyone expected her. She wore her standard PT uniform, black compression shirt, cargo pants, boots laced tight, hair pulled back. No jewelry, no watch, nothing that could catch or snag. She moved through the space like she'd been there 1,000 times before, because she had. She didn't stretch, didn't warm up, just stood in the center of the largest mat and waited. The door opened 10 minutes later. Corporals Roth, Kellen, and Bryant walked in together, mid-conversation, not paying attention. Then they saw her, All three stopped. The air changed. You could feel it, the way oxygen gets thinner right before a storm. Roth recovered first, forced a smirk. "Commander, didn't know you'd be here." "Ashad didn't move. I wasn't scheduled, but I thought we should talk." Kellen glanced at Bryant. Bryant looked at the floor. Roth took a step forward, trying to reclaim some of the confidence he'd had on the rooftop. About what? About yesterday. About the edge. About what happens when you push someone who doesn't push back. There was a pause, long enough for them to realize she wasn't here to file a report. She was here to deliver something else. "Look," Roth started, his voice careful now measured. "That was a mistake. We didn't mean." "You did," Ashaz's voice cut clean. "You meant every second of it. You wanted to scare me, to take me down a notch, to prove something to yourselves." She took a step forward, not aggressive, just closing distance. "And you succeeded. You pushed me off a building, you watched me fall, you saw me hit the ground." Another step. "But here's what you didn't account for. I got back up." Roth's jaw tightened. Kellen shifted his weight. Bryant's hands curled into fists at his sides, not in preparation, in anxiety. "So now," Ashak continued, "we're going to do this the right way. No reports, no court-martials, no paperwork, just correction." "What does that mean?" Kellen asked, voice thin. "It means you're going to learn what you should have learned the first time. That rank isn't about intimidation. It's about control. And control doesn't mean never getting hit. It means knowing exactly how to respond when you do." She gestured toward the mat. "One at a time. Same way you approached me yesterday, same motion, same intent, except this time I'm ready." Roth's eyes widened. "You want us to?" "I want you to try." Ashaz's voice was calm, almost gentle. "Because that's the only way you'll understand what you did wrong." There was a long silence. Then Roth looked at the other two, then back at her, and something in his expression shifted, not defiance, resignation. He nodded slowly. Okay. They lined up, 3 men, 1 woman, no audience, no cameras, just the echo of their breathing and the faint hum of the ventilation system overhead. Ashaz stood in the center of the mat, hands loose at her sides, boots planted heel to toe, shoulder width apart. No fighting stance, no defensive posture, just perfect balance. The kind that came from years of standing at the edge of rooftops, the edge of missions, the edge of moments where one wrong move meant you didn't come home. She turned her head slightly toward them. "Approach, one at a time, as you did yesterday." Roth went first. He stepped forward slowly, every muscle in his body clearly arguing with itself. He didn't move like a fighter. He moved like a man walking into a memory he couldn't outrun. He reached out tentatively, mimicking the same motion from the rooftop. Hand high, palm extended. Ashad didn't flinch. Instead, she pivoted gently on her right heel, guided his wrist across her chest, redirected his weight with a minor shift of her hip, placed him quietly flat on the mat. Thud. Roth blinked up at the ceiling lights. No pain, no injury, just impact and humiliation without force. Kellen stepped next. He was taller, heavier, less cautious. He led with a shoulder feint, then reached for Ashaz's collar. She stepped inside the grab, braced her left hand behind his elbow, rotated him forward using nothing but his own posture, lowered him knee first into a controlled fold against the ground. Tap. The breath left his chest in a quiet rush. His hands shook slightly as he blinked, eyes wide. Finally, Bryant. He looked like he'd rather be anywhere else on earth, but pride wouldn't let him step back. He lunged fast, sloppy. Ashaz stepped to the side, caught his wrist mid-thrust, rotated his arm gently behind his back, bent him down with one hand braced between his shoulder blades. His knees hit the mat. Breath hitched. He didn't resist. None of them did now. They knelt, shoulders rising and falling with adrenaline that had nowhere left to go. Ashaz stood behind them, spine straight, hands still down. Then she spoke. "This is why you never approach someone from behind." The words weren't loud, but they didn't have to be. They echoed across the mat, across the floor, into every breath they struggled to catch. Because when you do, she continued, you're not testing their strength. You're revealing your weakness. And weakness isn't about size or rank or training. It's about fear. Fear that someone might be better than you. Fear that you're not as important as you thought you were. She stepped around them slowly, deliberately, so they could see her face. I didn't file a report yesterday. Not because I couldn't. Because I wanted to see if you'd figure it out on your own. If you'd realize what you did. If you'd understand that pushing someone off a building doesn't make you stronger. It just makes you dangerous. And dangerous isn't the same as capable. Roth looked up at her. There were no words, just understanding, raw and uncomfortable. You had your moment, Ashas said quietly. Now I've had mine. And the difference is I didn't need to hurt you to make my point. She turned toward the exit, stopped, looked back. Tomorrow we train again. Same time, same place. And you'll do it right, because that's what correction looks like, not punishment, education. The door closed behind her without a sound. What happens when the people who wronged you realize they were never in control to begin with? Word spread faster than wine through chain link. By noon, half the facility knew. By evening, everyone did. Lieutenant Commander Breyer walked into the warehouse, took down 3 Marines. No injuries, no escalation, just precision. But what the rumors didn't capture, what they couldn't explain, was the weight of what had actually happened. Because it wasn't about dominance. It wasn't about proving who was tougher or faster or better trained. It was about showing 3 men that the woman they'd pushed off a building had never needed their respect to command it. She'd earned it long before they'd even laced their boots that morning. Commander Warwick heard about it by the end of the day. He sat in his office, door half open, reading the same report 3 times because he couldn't quite believe what he was seeing. Internal Affairs had documented the rooftop incident. Medical had logged the injuries, but there was no complaint, no formal charge, just a single line in a Shaz statement that read, "Matter resolved. Training continues." He'd called her in the next morning. She arrived on time, uniform immaculate, spine straight, no sign of the fall except for a faint bruise along her jawline that she hadn't bothered to cover. "Sit," he'd said. She'd remained standing, he didn't push it. "You didn't press charges. It wasn't a question, more of an observation." "No, sir." "You could have buried them." "I could have, but I didn't need to." Warwick leaned back in his chair. "Why?" "Because they're not bad Marines," she'd said simply. "They're ignorant ones, and ignorance can be corrected. Malice can't." He'd studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "What you did yesterday in that warehouse, that was off book." "Yes, sir." "It was also effective." He'd paused, "but it can't happen again, not like that, not without oversight." "Understood." He dismissed her, but as she turned to leave, he'd called after her. "Breyer," she'd looked back, "you didn't have to do this alone. We have systems for a reason." She'd met his gaze. "With respect, sir, sometimes the system moves too slow. And sometimes the lesson needs to land faster than paperwork." The door had closed softly behind her. Warwick had sat there for another 10 minutes, staring at the report before finally signing off on it. Matter resolved. Training continues. Because what else could he say? She'd done what the system couldn't. She'd corrected behavior without destroying careers. She'd delivered justice without demanding vengeance. And in doing so, she'd reminded everyone who'd heard the story that leadership wasn't about authority. It was about knowing when to wield it and when to let others learn from their own mistakes. That afternoon, the 3 corporals reported for their scheduled rotation. They arrived early, uniforms pressed, harnesses already fastened. They didn't speak to each other, didn't make eye contact, just stood in formation and waited. Asha arrived exactly on time. She walked past them without acknowledgement, moved to the center of the training area and began the day's briefing. Edge approach drill. Contact point at marker 3. Time starts when the forward boot crosses. The same instructions as 2 days ago, the same words, but everything had changed. Roth was the first to step forward when she called for volunteers. He executed the drill perfectly, precise foot placement, controlled descent, clean reset. When he climbed back up, he met her eyes for just a second. She nodded once. He exhaled. Kellen went next, then Bryant, both flawless, both silent, both carrying the weight of understanding that hadn't been there before. By the end of the session, other recruits were watching, not because something dramatic was happening, because something subtle was. 3 men who'd made a mistake were being given the chance to correct it, and they were taking it seriously. That was the lesson no one had expected. That correction didn't end with punishment. It began with it. And what happened after, what you did with the lesson once it was delivered, that was what defined whether you'd learned anything at all. Do you know what it feels like to reclaim the space where someone tried to break you? The sun was low by the time she returned. Evening had stretched the shadows across the yard, turning the training tower into something quieter, less imposing, more like memory than structure. The wind had softened. The rooftop was empty. Asha stepped through the stairwell door alone. Her boots made almost no sound on the concrete. She walked to the same yellow edge marker where she'd stood 2 mornings ago when her shoulder had been shoved and her body sent over the side like something disposable. She didn't look down at first. She looked forward, at the spacing between hooks, at the tether points, at the distant sound of gulls overhead and the far-off clang of a rucksack locker being closed 2 buildings over. Then slowly she approached the edge. Her boot stopped just before the line. She crouched, not for reflection, not for emotion, for inspection. She rechecked the anchor markings, pressed her palm flat against the cold surface, felt the texture of concrete under her skin. Nothing out of place, because she'd already realigned what needed correcting. Below, on the sandbag line, a lone recruit was still practicing fast kneel entries. He paused when he saw her, recognizing her silhouette at the edge, gave a nervous half gesture with his hand. "You training?" she called. "Yes, ma'am." Her voice didn't change. "Good, keep at it." He went back to work, slower, more focused. Asha stood again. She didn't linger at the edge, didn't pose. She simply stepped back, dusted her hands once, turned away. Behind her, the tower stood silent. And this time, no one followed her too closely, because control didn't belong to the highest rank. It belonged to whoever understood that correction changed more than punishment ever could. She walked down the rooftop stairwell alone. The building didn't feel like the site of something broken. It felt like something had been restored. Because that's what healing looked like. Not dramatic, not loud, just the quiet act of returning to the place where you fell and choosing to stand there again, not in defiance, in reclamation. The next morning, Asha ran her usual route. 5 miles, same path, same pace. Pre-dawn gray stretching over the facility like a blanket, her breathing steady, her stride even, no hesitation in her step. She passed the warehouse, past the medbay, past the admin wing, past all the places where the last 48 hours had unfolded, and she felt nothing but forward momentum. Because that's what survival taught you, that you didn't get stronger by dwelling on what tried to break you. You got stronger by moving past it, by letting the lesson land without letting the trauma linger. When she finished her run, she stopped near the flagpole, stood there for a moment, hands on her hips, chest rising and falling. The base was waking up around her, recruits shuffling toward morning formation, instructors reviewing clipboards, the machine of training clicking back into motion. And somewhere in that motion, 3 Marines were preparing for another day, another drill, another chance to prove they'd learned something. She didn't need to see them to know it. She could feel it, the shift, the change, the understanding that had settled into their bones and wouldn't leave. That was enough. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts. 3 weeks later, Asha stood in the same conference room where she declined a commendation. Commander Warwick sat across from her, along with Lieutenant Harper and a senior officer from Marine Command she didn't recognize. They'd called her in to review the incident one final time, to close the file, to make sure all parties were satisfied with the resolution. Commander Breyer, the senior Marine officer, began. "We've reviewed your statement, the witness accounts, and the medical reports. We also spoke with Corporals Roth, Kellen, and Bryant." His voice was measured, professional. "They've expressed deep regret for their actions. They've completed mandatory retraining. And they've requested the opportunity to apologize to you directly." Asha sat still. "That's not necessary." The officer blinked. "You don't want an apology." "I don't need one. They've already shown me they understand what they did wrong. Words won't add to that." Warwick leaned forward slightly. "For the record, what you did, handling this outside formal channels, it's not something we can officially condone." "I understand." But he continued, his voice softening, "It was effective. And sometimes effectiveness matters more than protocol." Harper shifted in her seat. "We did want to acknowledge, however, that your actions prevented what could have been a career-ending situation for 3 young Marines. That shows remarkable restraint and judgment." Ashad didn't react, just nodded once. "Are we finished?" The senior officer exchanged a glance with Warwick, then nodded. "Yes. File closed. Thank you for your service, Commander." She stood, saluted, turned to leave. Breyer, Warwick called after her. She paused, off the record. "What you did took more courage than pressing charges would have. I hope they realize that." Ashad looked back at him. "They will, eventually. That's how lessons work. They don't land all at once. They settle in over time." The door closed quietly behind her. Outside, the facility stretched before her. Training towers, obstacle courses, barracks, all of it familiar. All of it home in the way places become home when you've bled into them. She walked past the warehouse, past the medbay, past the rooftop tower, and she felt nothing but the steady rhythm of her own breath. In, out, forward. Because that's what moving on looked like. Not forgetting, not forgiving in the traditional sense, but choosing to let the lesson exist without letting the anger consume it. She'd been pushed off a building. She'd fallen 2 stories. She'd hit the ground hard enough to bruise ribs and compress her spine. And then she'd gotten up, walked to the warehouse, delivered correction face to face, and walked away without needing anyone to tell her she'd done the right thing. Because she already knew. That night she sat in her quarters, same small room, same single bunk, same desk with nothing on it but a lamp and a notebook. She opened the notebook to the blank page she'd stared at days ago, and this time she wrote. Not a journal entry, not a reflection, just 3 words. "Matter resolved, forward." She closed the notebook, turned off the lamp, lay back on the bunk and stared at the ceiling. Tomorrow she'd wake at 5, run her route, report for duty, train recruits, execute drills, the same rhythm she'd followed for years. The same discipline that had carried her through black bag operations and blast zones and missions no one would ever speak about. And somewhere on this base, 3 Marines would do the same. They'd wake up, lace their boots, report for training, and they'd carry the lesson she'd given them into every decision they made from here forward. That was the point, not punishment, not revenge, correction. The kind that changed behavior because it changed understanding. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts. And when it does, the lesson lands harder than any fist ever could. Because dignity doesn't demand respect, it commands it. Quietly, completely, without ever needing to raise its voice. Ashad closed her eyes, let the silence settle around her, and for the first time in days she felt the weight lift. Not because the fall hadn't happened, but because she'd turned it into something else, something useful, something that would outlast the bruises and the rumors and the whispers. A lesson, clean, precise, delivered exactly when it needed to be. And that, she thought as sleep finally found her, was worth more than any apology ever could be.